Rostock. Your center, your pedestrian era, beautiful, everything clean, everything new. I confess that I walked with pleasure in you, that it was nice. Not to speak of the ships and the harbor, but, and this not to say would be dishonest, it gave another side. Prefabricated buildings, were they now more beautiful than formerly? Beautiful they were at least now not. Bleak, cold, repellent. Not a nice place to live, not a nice place to grow up. Excuse this for what you stand for many, the nights, the hate, the inability of the nation, the fear of the residents. There's nothing to apologize. Deeds are deeds. I walk along the pier, look at a sailing ship, become wistful once again, dreams, do nothing, inaction, sometimes more inexcusable than to do something. Heiligendamm. So, once I lived at a small sea, but even that was very nice. After all, the body of water extended to the horizon. It was nice to walk along the beach, sometimes from Heiligendamm to Warnemünde and later back again. However, my most beautiful impression was another. One evening it became increasingly stormy, and at night a severe thunderstorm was ongoing. I went to the dike. It was impressive. The power and dynamics of the waves, the roar, the air, the clouds, as they frantic, constantly shape-changing, ripping, merging, scattered across the sky. I breathed in and out the heavy with wet air in deep dumping drags, could not get enough. Then the part with the concrete walls. The waves stroke with immeasurable momentum against the obstacle, rose towards the sky. Even from a distance it was clear that it was impossible to go there, where the waves were fighting with the concrete. Meter by meter I dared to advance. Drenched, swaying in the storm, the loud crying of the water ached in my ears, and it would be ridiculous to claim I would have had no fear. But just she was it who urged me forward on and on, until I fearfully, wet, feeling cold, barely able to hold myself a steer, still a whole stretch off the edge, had to admit myself that I, ridiculous human, has nothing to set against this force. To go forward to the edge would have probably meant the certain death. At least it would have not been foreseeable what the water would have done to me. So I tried to stay some more and back down then. Seldom I felt me so free in my life. Redeemed, happy. Today I wonder why I did not go forward. Today I would do it. Munich. My deepest impression, however, made the English garden on me. More precise, the English garden in winter. Even without white blanket it was nice, but now, gorgeous, quiet and peaceful it lie there. How nice to go therein, to add your traces to the traces of others. Once I stopped amazed. This perspective I knew not at all. It actually took quite a time until I get clear about that I was in the middle of the lake. Startled at first, almost somewhat panicked, could I break through the ice, sink even? What an unfamiliar idea. Around me traces, others were also gone this way, wherefore I did not immediately notice where I was. Turned back. I stood in the middle of it. Thus, I also could simply walk on by. It would make no difference. So I went ahead, always hearing on each cracking sound. How strange. I had never before, and never later, such fear I could break through the ice and then drown. But it was not the drowning in itself what causes me this fear, but rather the image of one who was broken through the ice and now caught under the ice cap. An image from several films, gasping for breath, miserably suffocating, not drowning. But finally I reached the other waterside and was able to continue my way more quiet again. Heidelberg. When I had signed up in Heidelberg for an annual school to obtain the secondary school leaving certificate, I thought there too not to commute every day because the distance to my residence was yet quite large, but rather to look for a room. I wanted to finance it, among other therewith, that I wanted to work hourly in a bookstore. And so I had off to go into each bookstore at Heidelberg to ask if there would be a possibility for me. I did not expect to get such a response. Precise denials were still nice. Of one, to phrase it differently, would mean to lie. They sent me flying out. I was very disappointed. But then I found a sympathetic ear finally. It was a beautiful bookstore, and the older gentleman was very kind. He listened to me that I want to improve myself in schools, would be fond of books very much, and it would be wonderful to live in Heidelberg. He promised me to think about it, and I left the shop with great joy. All day I had defeated myself again and again once more to ask. Not had let me be discouraged by not a rejection, and now I finally had received the reward. I went in the store after a few days, when I was told by the old man that it yet would not be possible now. I do not remember exactly, but it was something with the weekdays on which I was able to work or just not. He really had made an effort, showed me a listing which showed him that I had too few opportunities to work effectively for him. I was terribly disappointed, commuted the year, did not live in Heidelberg. How much Heidelberg would have changed my life? Many years later, as a second profession, I would learn that of the bookseller. When I sometimes went through Heidelberg today, I ask myself many a time how the city would have affected me that year, the many tourists, mainly from Asia and the United States, the many students, or should I say coeds. It should take a few more years, then I should be a student myself. And today? Will Heidelberg change my life today? I cannot imagine that after the 14th of July it will be, as always, no matter how the response of the audience will turn out, the mere fact to sit on a stage and read from this manuscript, to reveal something right out in the open about me to other people, has to cause to trigger something. How large the fear to disappoint? How large the hope to please? How large the grief that also she's no longer two? G. Kösters, Akademische Buchhandlung. Augsburg. 3 internet cafes. The first was on the outskirts towards Friedberg in a state of prefabricated houses. I always drove there by bus. It was very strange, a single-story building, very large, especially since the inside was one large room. I think it was used or was supposed to be a kind of cultural center, meeting place for the residents. I never asked. On one wall a number of computers were lined up. Vis-a-vis, one could buy all sorts of things. Between was plenty of free space, a very strange place. One had to walk several staircases and corridors to go to the lavatory. The second was opposite the train station and was actually quite normal, an internet cafe as there are many. Confusing was only that at the checkout counter, always the same, a perhaps mid-20-year-old Turkish man, tall, muscular, precise beard, was. No matter when I was there, no matter how long I was there, he was also always there, until he was twice there at the same time. Really completely identical twins. The third place was the strangest. Actually quite normal. Several times I had been there. The large staircase downwards I had already noticed. There it led to the lavatory. Then I needed the lavatory, went downstairs and discovered that the room upstairs was actually only a kind of lobby. Beneath was a large, very high, except for a few tables and some rubbish, completely empty room. The ensemble was probably intended as a kind of club. Upstairs maybe a bar, a few tables, and below was celebrated, the DJ put on. To the lavatory you had still to walk along a lengthy corridor that still continues, ramified, and several doors had, which were all closed. Definitely one had to be already under quite different buildings. And in its emptiness and bleakness, almost surreal place. I went to the cafes because I had problems with my provider after the move. They should drag on. So I visited for a long time as possible every day at least one of the cafes. It astonished me again and again how many people there were. At the station I still understood it, transients who wanted only briefly look up something or perhaps pass the time, but otherwise. Had not everyone his port at home, at least if it worked? What all these people did. Many seemed to talk via Skype with friends or relatives, listen to music or watch movies. Perhaps it even was better not to know everything, even when these places were not really anonymous. What I made? Thank you for listening.